Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is starting his week-long trip to the United States, where he is scheduled to meet with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York and also hold a bilateral meeting with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington. Jaishankar and the Biden administration is expected to majorly focus their discussions on COVID-related cooperation. The key meeting is to ensure that the supply of raw materials from the US for manufacturing vaccines in India continues uninterrupted. India is likely to be one of the beneficiaries of the stock of vaccines the US is willing to share with the world, that is. The talks are expected to revolve around India's pitch to secure the unused vaccines, particularly those manufactured by AstraZeneca. New Delhi is also looking at the joint production of Johnson & Johnson's vaccines in collaboration with the US in India and other ways to help manufacturers like the Serum Institute of India boost their own production. Remember, the US Embassy had already clarified that private sector production talks are underway between pharma companies in order to make this happen. According to the MEA brief, the External Affairs Minister will be having two interactions with business forums at the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum on economic and pandemic relief between India and the United States. In recent weeks, both groups have formed a global task force on the pandemic response, along with the US Chamber of Commerce, to work on different aspects of pandemic relief. This includes the provision of 1,000 ventilators required by Indian hospitals, 25,000 oxygen concentrators, as well as coordination of human resources executives in India and the US for this effort. Other bilateral issues are also on the agenda. The leaders are expected to discuss resilient global supply chains, as well as the Indo-Pacific region and subsequent issues in the backdrop of China's growing belligerence in the region. The meeting is Dr. Jaishankar's first visit to the US since the new president, Joe Biden, assumed office in January. Remember, Jaishankar had previously met Blinken on the sidelines of the G7 foreign ministers meeting in London earlier and had also interacted with the US Global Task Force on pandemic relief. The Indian External Affairs Minister is also expected to make a stop at the United Nations, New York, to meet with the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Apart from discussing the COVID situation in India, the meeting is also expected to be in the backdrop of India joining the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member this year. They might also exchange views on Afghanistan peace talks as well as the Israel-Palestine conflict. Our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, is joining us live on this broadcast for more details. Siddhant, thanks so much for joining us. Now, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, is embarking on a 5-day US trip. What's on the agenda and how will this impact the joint efforts in tackling the pandemic?
Well, Priyanka, the Indian External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, is already in the United States. He is in New York. And there are two components to this visit. First is the multilateral component and second is the bilateral component. The multilateral component comes first since he is in New York. He will be meeting the Secretary General of United Nations and talking about many issues, the regional issues, issues like Israel-Palestine, ongoing development, and of course the COVID challenge as well. Remember, India is a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for a 2-year term period, and we have seen how the Indian External Affairs Minister has joined number of meetings at the high table. Next comes the bilateral aspect, where he is going to have a meeting with his counterpart, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Now that meeting is expected to now happen on 28th, given the fact that just a short while ago the US State Department has announced that the US Secretary of State will be in West Asia for the various conversations he is going to have with stakeholders regarding Israel-Palestine issue. He will be there from 24th to 27th. So clearly, when he will be in Washington, the Indian External Affairs Minister is likely to speak to number of pharma majors. We know ahead of the visit, the Indian envoy to the United States has met the chairperson and the CEOs of companies like Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. And of course, we know that both US and India are part of the Quad initiative. And under the Quad initiative, we know the Quad COVID vaccine initiative is key. And under that, India is going to produce number of vaccines, US vaccine, Johnson & Johnson vaccines that will be given to many countries in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right. Now, Siddhant, Jaishankar is also expected to meet, as we know, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. What can we expect on that front?
Well, I do expect the key focus to be on the COVID crisis. But we know that India has been talking about the UN reforms hastening up the UN reforms. In fact, last year when the Indian Prime Minister spoke at the United Nations General Assembly virtually, he talked about the need for urgent reforms at the United Nations Security Council to better reflect the global reality, and of course India being part of it. We also know just a few days ago the Indian External Affairs Minister had spoken at a meeting on Africa at the United Nations Security Council, and there he had strongly backed an African seat at the UNSC. So reforms are key things for New Delhi, given it wants a new reflection at the high table, but also talking about things that of course are troubling the region, the issue when it comes to Israel-Palestine, and also how India can play a role when it comes to the vaccination, global vaccination. We know even as we speak there is a pause in exports of COVID vaccines.
All right, Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast, and thank you for all your insights. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.